Hey, good evening. It's kind of funny. I have not done anything at 7 o'clock during this period of spring. And so when I've done this in the past, a Sunday at 7, it would be dark in this room. So I hadn't anticipated that the sun would come out brilliantly today when it has been doom and gloom. And I would have to kind of rearrange a little bit my setup. So I was going, oh, I'm so glad you're coming on. Thank you, Kim, for being here. I'm glad to see. Oh, happy Mother's Day to everybody that's going to be listening. Kind of a fun day for me to do this. So I'm so glad that you're coming on and checking this out. But as I was saying, I hadn't realized that the sun was going to be beaming in and that I was going to have to move back closer to the hearth. So when I trip on this, I just don't want you to laugh real hard when I trip on the hearth. And I thought I was going to be able to show you, because I've always enjoyed doing that, I thought I was going to be able to show you my boots, because this will be the last boot day for sure for this 2021. But the little copper, I had this whole copper thing going, with I thought this was all going to blend together. So anyway, you just kind of, isn't it this whole year, we just kind of learned to pivot. So if you had knew that I was going to come on, you may have, and I hope you did, you are on my email list, or you asked to be on my email list, and you were emailed a copy of this booklet. And if you are on and do not have this booklet, you can put your email, why don't you add your email, something after Beth Gallagher was the last one on my last email post that my office assistant, Jessie, sent it in. So if you are, please do that. So send, and we'll send you this afterwards, but you'll get through it today without it. But those of you that have it, I hope you've got it printed so that you'll be able to do that. So I'm just kind of checking in to see all these fun, happy Mother's Day. Well, whenever you listen to it, I'm so glad that you came on. What I did was, I had really worked on this presentation, and I was giving it the first live workshop that we did. And so I wanted to be able to do something live, and here I am. And then I wanted to share it with people who were unable to come. And the next live workshop that we're doing is not going to be till November 18th. But any of you who are geographically close to Bourbonnais, Kankakee, or if you're willing to fly in for a workshop, that will be the next scheduled all-day workshop, November 18th. So get it on your calendars. So right now, you've got this with you, and it's the greatest story of my life. Everyone has a story that the world needs to hear. An era of the global pandemic feels like it's coming to a close. For over a year, our country has been mired in not one deep crisis, but several, including a pandemic, an economic meltdown, and one of the most polarizing political transitions in our history. And as we emerge kind of blinking in the light, we're literally deciding day to day, what can I do now? Spring is here. It's a good time to take a deep breath and assess the changes that have occurred. Now, I've been reading books, listening to podcasts, watching the news, constantly checking my Wall Street Journal for articles that my daughters do not want me to send them. And I've also asked people if they're willing to share what they're feeling and experiencing. I've been acutely aware that we are still in a very strange place, and there's still uncertainty. On Easter, there were 6 adults and 6 kids, and they were coming to Easter, and they all had been vaccinated. And one other adult, it was actually Amy's mother-in-law, was invited to come, and she'd been vaccinated. She visits her parents who are in the nursing home, and they had been fully vaccinated. And at the very last minute before that Easter Sunday, she decided she wasn't going to join us. Uncertainty. The other, another incident that occurred that kind of drove that home to me was I have a 8th grade granddaughter, and she wears masks to school and to her church in Iowa. And she came to our church, and she sat down and she started to look around, and she did not feel at all comfortable because she realized that in that big church, no one had masks on. We left early. Uncertainty. There still is uncertainty. And as we recover, how might we take what has happened and move forward? How might we look at our experiences so life going forward is better for us? Let's start with this question. How long have you lived? Now, your first inclination is probably going to be to go for your birthday, and you're going to tell me how old you are. You might tell me, do you want years? Do you want months? Do you want minutes? You might ask that, but that's not how long your heart, that is how long your heart has been pumping blood. But I want to give you a little bit of a mind shift when I talk about how long have you lived. Time, it's measured in minutes. Life, it's measured in moments. Let's dig into that a little bit. It's easy to calculate your age and time. More challenging, but maybe more interesting, to quantify your life if I ask you to choose moments. What moments would you choose to define your life? I'm asking for moments that are remembered forever. Imagine you got a 9-year-old little boy, takes a field trip to New York City, and he's on top of the Empire State Building in the 4th grade. He's just in the 4th grade, 9 years old. And as he steps onto the observation deck overlooking New York City, time stood still. He says, in one mystical, magical moment I took in that city, and if I live 1,000,000 years, that moment will still be a part of my consciousness because I was fully alive when I lived it. I knew then at 9 years old that somehow I was going to be a part of that city. Do you have a top of the moment Empire State Building moment? Do you have one of those? When was it that life stood still for you? Now, those moments are often few and far between. I want you to think about it again. Time is measured in minutes. Life is measured in moments. Was there a time in your life that was life-changing? It could be a mystical, magical moment for you. It could be one of those, if I live 1,000,000 years, that moment will be part of my life forever because I was fully alive when I lived it. It could be that. But the moment may have felt negative when it happened. My husband talks about one. It was the day his mom and dad called him home from college, and they sat him down to tell him that there would be no more financial help. He was on his own. His dad had made a bad business deal with a partner, and the partner didn't tell the truth to the bank, and his dad refused to declare bankruptcy. He intended to pay it back. So Reed had to get a full-time job, pay for college himself. And that moment changed the way Reed thinks about working, how he thinks about money. And there's an integrity piece as well, because it took his dad 15 years, but he watched his dad pay back every penny. At the time, that defining moment for Reed, it maybe didn't seem positive, but it certainly was life-changing. I want you to think what's a moment for you. There's a place in the booklet or the pages that you printed off, and it says, how long have you lived? Do you see that? I think you probably do. And you see that there's a number 1 and there's a number 2 on that page. And I'd like you to choose at least 2. You can write down others, but we're going to end up choosing 2 defining moments that you can think of right now. There are probably others, and you might think of them later, but two right now. What was a turning point or tipping point in your life? I want you to fill it in. Just get a sheet of paper or in your little book. And if you're having trouble, how about this question? If I were to ask you, what decision literally changed the trajectory of your life? Literally. Maybe it was a person that on your soul. Was meeting a person a defining moment? It could be your significant other. It could be the death of someone you loved. My nephew was 15 when his dad died from ALS. And you know, that has been a defining moment in his whole life. He's a dad now, and it continues to impact him. You may have been a kid, might not have been your decision, but a decision that your parents made. Maybe they moved you when you were young. Was that a defining moment? I want you to choose two. I want you to write down two. Maybe there's a mistake that you made and you kind of regret it. Defining moment. An accomplishment you're most proud of, a defining moment. You can divide your life not in years but in defining moments, but just two today. But you can add others as you think of them. And when I ask, how long have you lived? You realize I'm asking about moments that brought clarity to your life. Moments that change the trajectory of your life. Moments that define your life because they're based on before that moment and after that moment. Whenever a defining moment happens, whatever it is, whoever is a part of that moment, how you react to that defining moment affects your life forever. Can I repeat that? How you respond to that defining moment, how you handle that moment is going to change you forever. Now let's consider the universal defining moment that we've all been living through. It's a pandemic, a global turning point, the pandemic of 2020. Today, we're going to look at the pandemic as a mutually experienced defining moment. If someone asks you, hey, how you doing? What's your story? You know, you have a pandemic story. I know you do. We all do. How many of you lead with the good stuff? You start off with a positive story when someone asks. How many go for the, oh, can you believe what happened to me version? Do you lean positive? Do you talk about the negative? Ask yourself, what's the story that I'm going to tell when all this is over? When you choose that story that you're going to tell the rest of the world, let's consider how that story is going to serve you. See, I have kids and grandkids. This is a historical time, an unprecedented experience that's going to be talked about for generations. What story will my kids what story will my grandkids tell their kids and their grandkids? Do you even know what your kids might say about their lives during the pandemic? Does it really matter what they say? See, I think it does. I believe what a person decides to say is going to impact the rest of their life. That might sound a little dramatic, but let me explain why I feel this way. A signature story, defining moment, signature story, centers on a day that begins like any other day, and that day rewrites the rest of your life. A signature story is almost always born out of crisis, and I'm going to bet that each of you remember the day in March, whatever it was, when you really did shut your life down. That, a defining moment, the beginning of a signature story. What's yours? Now from there, I see a person's signature story going one of two ways after this pandemic. It could easily be a victim story. I got laid off. I didn't get to play football. I didn't go to a restaurant for 8 months. Or a person could spin that same life a different way and tell a victory story. While I was laid off, I started my own small business in our garage. Since we didn't have football practice, my buddies and I, we rode our bikes down to the creek and we went fishing, and my grandpa gave me his pole and it was awesome. Our family, they ate dinner every night together. It took some getting used to, but we laughed at jokes and we talked about the day, and it kind of became a favorite part of our new normal. See, when I talk about writing your story, I'm not talking about stories that make the 5 o'clock news, not the headline of a newspaper, nothing ginormous, but the story you write should be worthy of telling at the family reunion when you finally get to have one. It's the story you're going to tell when you go back to the office and you're kind of sitting in the break room finally. And you know what? It's the story that you're going to share years and years from now when you're sitting around that fire pit that you built way back in the spring of 2020. That story. Now let's acknowledge first, it hasn't been easy. This has been a year of losses. There's a book called The Sixth Stage of Grief. You can get your sheet out again. The author, David Kessler, talks about coping with the losses that we're experiencing, and he references Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying. She lists 5 stages of grief. In fact, I taught them when I taught high school. They are shock, denial, anger, depression, and acceptance. And he acknowledges that everyone has lost something this year. Lost the traveling we did, the family and friend gatherings we used to have, the concerts, the games, the tournaments that got canceled, even the way we're allowed to grieve when a loved one dies. He says, people talk about crying for no reason. He says they may not understand that heaviness that they're feeling, the sadness that they wake up with, the irritability or the anger that they have. And he says, acknowledge. That's grief. The author adds that we all need a 6th stage of grief. I want you to write that in. And that is getting to the point where you find meaning in what's happened. Can you add that in your little booklet? The 6th stage of grief is meaning. If we give meaning to what happened to us, it's going to be easier to work through what's happened to us and come out better on the other side. Meaning can be finding a way to communicate the pandemic. Meaning can help you just feel like a better, stronger person for having lived through it. There's power in that. There's power in that feeling. That's where the stories you tell yourself come in. Think of messages in your mind that can hold you back. You've told them. I know you have. I'm too young. I'm too old. I don't have the right degree. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not pretty enough. I don't have enough money. Have you ever said any of these things to yourselves? And how many of you know already that your children do this to themselves? They tell themselves these stories. People undermine themselves with their own stories. And if you focus on everything that was canceled, everything you were cheated out of doing, every thought, that can pick away at your confidence and weaken how you handle crisis when it hits again, because it will hit again. Were there moments you felt devastated? Yeah. But that's not going to serve you. If you're going to write a story for this defining moment during this epic catastrophe, it's just been what would you call it, a catastrophic world event. If you're going to write, how can you make it a good one? And again, why build an amazing signature story around this pandemic? Because your stories are way more important than the situation you found yourself in. Because your stories, they can turn into fulfilling prophecies on how you handle adversity. Because the difference between your success and failure with challenges you're going to face later in life can be based on what you tell yourself. Will you talk endlessly about what didn't happen this year? Will you complain and whine and blame? Or will you look for grateful, positive, life-changing decision moments? Will you focus on all that you overcame, or are you going to wallow in what didn't happen? Let's go back to the influence you have and why it matters. And you know, I love it when you put little responses in here. Maybe you'll tell me one of those pandemic, just a brief little few sentences of part of your story that you're dealing with. I would appreciate that so much. I honestly enjoy so much going back and looking at it. So if you're able and you could tell me just a little bit about what's going to be in your story, oh, that would mean so much to me. I'd appreciate that so much. And if it's something so personal, you feel better about putting it to a private message, maybe on Facebook, or emailing it to me, I would take it that way too. But let's go back to the influence that you have and why it matters. You know, if you're a leader within your business, or if you're a mom and a grandma, grandpa, the way that you look at your life during the pandemic can very well impact how others are going to look at it as well. If you start with negative stories, do you notice that people always want to one-up you and, oh, mine is way worse, and the conversation immediately becomes mired in the negative and you go in that downward spiral? Again, I'm not negating the tragedy. I'm not ignoring the seriously bad events. I'm just inviting you to consider, how will it serve you, your kids, and the other people in your life that you influence? Have you ever seen how a single failure can leave you with a defeatist attitude? A single trauma can amputate your confidence. A single rejection can destroy your willingness to trust. One time. You can't let that happen. You just can't let that happen. That can't be. What do you think of these two words? How do you like it? See what you think. Pandemic revisionism. You might need to revise how we remember the pandemic. Pandemic revisionism. See, memories, they're subjective and selective. And if you don't believe me, you just ask the fans of some opposing team to give you their opinions right after one of those crazy plays. You know, memory is like that. If needed, you can flip that switch on how you tell your story, and it can change your life. What will be born out of the pandemic of 2020? Will you remember? Will there be a defining moment as tough times and obstacles that you overcome and you're preparing for bigger and better thing? Let's fit a year's story onto one page. Oh, you know what? I don't think you can fit a year's story onto one page, can you? But you've got this page, and I want you to pull it out. And if you don't mind, I would love so much if you could write on, if you could. Today we're going to start you thinking, hoping it's going to generate conversation tonight. Maybe you're going to print these off and you're going to give them to different family members, maybe even your kids, and ask them to write down what their thoughts were. Maybe, sometime this week or next weekend, and the next time maybe that you're with your family. But let's look at the pandemic, think of all the experiences, and we're going to focus on how I did grow, because you did grow. You've probably been an experience junkie during this pandemic. You've grown so much through what's happened to you. So let's search for personal experiences that show positive growth. Let's jot them down in the squares as I talk, if you don't mind. The first one says, how did you entertain yourself differently? Now, if I were here, you might want to jot them down. I'm not good at seeing with my contact, without my glasses, but I was wondering if you could jot down some things that you did differently. We went to restaurants, we went to plays, we went to sporting events, we went to movie theaters, we went to school events, we went to music concerts, and none of them were available. So what did you do? I know for me, Netflix, I don't know, was there some movie series I watched? Seriously, oh my gosh, I watched more movies, more TV on the TV than I watched in 16 years altogether. I just want you to know. Did you actually read a book? 3 college, high school students at home after dinner every night. You know what they did? They had each one on different nights were in charge of family Olympics, and they had different Olympics that they had every night. So write down something that you did that was different. Then it's how did you figure out? Oh, this one's a tough one. Number 2. How did you figure out education or your job? I know there's some people right now that are going to say, Jeannie, you want me to find something positive about this? Okay, this has many facets. It's for you and it's for your kids. What did you learn that was positive? I know, come on, pandemic revisionism. If you have kids, I'm going to tell you something. It really is important to make education a part of your story, looking for something positive, a win. Because if you continue to say that this was a lost year for my kids, I'm not sure that that's really going to serve those kids if they hear that and that's what they start to believe. Excuse, I know, but there has to be some reasons. You don't need to give them a reason to feel like a failure or an excuse to be allowed to fail. Think of the mental and future ramifications of something like that. I was watching a podcast last week, and a single mom's description of at-home virtual learning with her 11-year-old son. There was some tragic moments at the beginning of that. And she continued, and they, kind of played their way through. And it was hybrid school, and it was virtual school, then it was hybrid school, and it was, she was working full-time and trying to get it all done, and all this went on. But you know what? How she ended that was she said, you know what? We finished and we're still buddies. And I asked him today how he felt today was, because he'd just gone back to school, and he said it was an 8 out of 10. Their story is going to mirror the story that you tell. Okay, and I want you to mention something in this little spot on here. I want you to mention your job. How'd you pivot? Some people, honestly, I know, I talked to them, they had their best year ever. And some people, those people, they feel guilty about talking about it. Some do. And I know, but, sometimes the pivot is what it was. So I want you to find something. The third one in here says, how did you escape? Do something different. Maybe out of desperation. Honestly, I don't know if I can admit it now, but we went to Utah and we rode UTVs. And I would never have done that, probably, with my grandkids. Added nature into my life because, oh my gosh, that's not been my strong suit. You're going to take some, I'm not going to give you a lot of time, but I want you to think about this, and I'd love for you to fill it in. How did you create? The next one says, how did you create? And this is a great word, a better aesthetic environment. Do you not love that? Aesthetic environment. You immersed yourself into something, an event or an environment that was fulfilling. And it can be aesthetic, could be as little as you redid your house. Oh my goodness. I know so many people tell about kitchens and bedrooms, cleaning out closets that they hadn't looked at for years. Self-care, sometimes, not at the beginning, but eventually they added some things, some pampering. Why was that so important? Just to be there in that moment. Took walks. I never thought I would walk when it was cold. I got to tell you, I have to be honest. But hey, I watched my grandson experience ice fishing, and we've lived on a lake in the winter for 20 some years, and it's the first time I had a grandkid go down there and get to go fishing. And I did watch most of that from the living room window, but he certainly enjoyed it. So how did you, number 5 was, how did you connect? This has been very interesting because, and maybe you'll give me, I'd love if you'd add a little something about what you did, but I know that there have been some lifelong relationships that have been altered, and I'm going to say good or bad. Some of you developed relationships with your neighbors that you never would have. Some developed relationships through social media. Some people, I said good or bad, lost friendships, added friendships. got closer to people, your kids, your spouse, your significant other, the person living with you? Maybe you wanted to kill them sometimes. Okay, but how did you connect? I actually added TikTok to my life. Never thought I would do that, with my 8th grade granddaughter being my agent. I taught classes on cracking the social code. Some of you disconnected, got rid of toxic relationships that weren't good for you. So here's the question. Who do you know that you didn't know before? And who do you know better? Number 6, how'd you add value? Did you think ever, I want to make a difference? Oh my gosh, so many did. Oh, you nurses, teachers, oh my heart. Stay-at-home moms who are working and with your kids. Everybody was stay-at-home mom and dads. I'm so sorry, but everybody was staying at home and managing to do that. But a lot of times there were people, I don't mean to save the world, but they made a difference with people. I know some people, like, whose life did you add to? You know, when you think about that, like, who did you do something for? I don't care if it was, picking up groceries or taking somebody, something that they didn't have access to, helping them, laugh or smile. How'd you add value to someone's life? Everyone I know who makes a difference in somebody else's life, they feel more fulfilled. So anyway, this year, as I wandered around the neighborhood, getting in my daily 10,000 steps and convincing myself that I probably could make a fruit pizza, I did not feel particularly fulfilled. I'm going to be honest with you. And I mentioned I watched more TV in a year than 16 years combined, and Zoom calls, as good as they were sometimes, they didn't satisfy my extrovert longings. I just didn't feel like I was adding value to anyone. And because of that social media class that I took, that cracking the social code, that was when if any of you have watched these, that's when I did my very first Facebook Live. I didn't even realize at the time, if you'll remember, that I thought you were all going to be on there and I was going to be getting to see your faces. That was a bust, I thought. However, there were over 7,800 views on that post. And then there were 5,400 on another one. And what happened that was better was I started bantering back and forth with people. Some of you contacted me on Facebook. Some of you, as we've gone out, even now, people have said to me, I was out and I was with a woman I hadn't seen, for what would be a year. And she said, oh, I watched all of your Facebook. You did? I had no idea. If you did watch any other ones, maybe you'll tell me. But what happened after doing that Facebook Live, that's when my pandemic story changed. I had a private message, and a woman told me about her husband. This is what she wrote. He has 2 years to retire, and COVID has taken a toll on his ability to dream. Your video was so great for him because it inspired him to send a video to his leadership council, kids and coaches, and he's already received feedback from them about how they needed his words of hope during that pandemic season. She continued and said, your 37-minute video is like a pebble thrown in the giant lake that is continuing to ripple into the lives of so many people beyond who you know. Thank you for using your talents and inspiring us to do the same. That post, that wasn't about me. I realized that each of us can be a conduit where people can recognize their value and try something new as well. I had one other text message that confirmed that. This one, it was a text. And I woke up to it. It said, Jeannie, you came to mind this morning during my reading. Author Mark Batterson was talking about the influence on people that we may have, and he said, You may not influence millions of people, but you may influence one person who influences millions. And the text continued, Jeannie, that line made me think about how you influenced me. And now I share my story, and I keep hearing from people who share my story that influenced them. That last sentence in that book that she's talking about, it's given me chills. What if you were called to influence one person who will influence millions? I don't know who that one person might be. But if you're sitting, listening quietly, or I can only hope that you're feeling quietly reflective and you're quietly formulating the pandemic story, your pandemic story, that you're going to write. See, I do believe that victory stories will be written about this pandemic, and yours. Your story, your story. It could be the one that influences millions. Thank you so much. I'm going to think of you as my champion audience. And I want you to know that you are an integral part of my own victory story. And if you need that sheet, you be sure and email me. You put November 18th down, and I'm so happy to have had the chance to be with you today.